So we got two guests from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and they decided to change the schoolyards and to make better schools that way. And the theme this time is educating for responsibility, happiness, and beauty. And I bet that we got all those keywords in there. So Hannah and Erin, please introduce yourselves and your work and tell us what you do.
Thank you for your introduction. Kia ora everybody. Kia ora is how we say hello in the Māori language, the Indigenous language of New Zealand. My name's Hannah, and I'm going to share how we introduce ourselves in the Māori culture. So, ko whare pūhunga tōku maunga, my mountain is called Whare Pūhunga. Ko Waikato tōku awa, my river is Waikato. Ko Raukawa tōku iwi, my tribe is Raukawa. Ko Ngāti Huri tōku hapu, my sub-tribe is Ngāti Huri. So that way of introducing ourselves, and this is important for our conversation, inherently connects us to the land, the rivers, the moana, the oceans, and the skies in our beautiful environment here in New Zealand, Aotearoa. My colleague and I, Erin, we are part of Te Puna Taiao Charitable Trust, and as Lena mentioned, we've been working in schools predominantly in looking at how outdoor spaces can be maximised to ensure that our kids are happy, are exposed to beauty, and have a sense of responsibility to themselves, their family, and their wider community. My background is in education. I was a chemistry teacher for a number of years. I now work in a space with Indigenous schools, schools that deliver in Te Reo Māori, the Māori language, and I'm very privileged and honoured to be here to talk to you as the first country to see the sun, we are sometimes called, and lead off this global conversation. I'll hand it over to my dear friend and colleague Erin, and she can introduce herself. Kia ora ihoa.
Kia ora Hannah and kia ora koutou, e mihi ana kia koutou, so greetings to you all. Ko Erin Green tōku ingoa, so Erin Green is my name, ko Pākehā aho. So I'm here, Pākehā is a Māori term for non-Indigenous to New Zealand, so here by grace of the Te Tiriti o Waitangi. So that again is a big part of, I guess, who we are and why we're here speaking today and why we got involved with what we got involved with. So yeah, we're very happy to be here with you all and excited by, I think, the subject matter and how well aligned it is to what we've been trying to do for the last coming up 5-6 years now. So it's really exciting to see other people doing similar things and hearing about similar conversations that are happening. So yeah, really happy to be here. So I guess the genesis of our mahi, our work that we've been doing together, Hannah and I sort of started. Hannah is a mum to 3 children. I'm mum to 4. So and my background isn't in education, so this is kind of fresh to me. My background is more in the marine sciences and policy, social policy space as well. So I guess I became interested in education, as I think lots of parents do when their kids start school. So this project started when Hannah and I's children started transitioning from early childhood places that were very beautiful and connected, where there was a big focus on play, where our children were able to use their free time and follow their passions. And then they got to school and I was a bit shocked at how little things had changed, I guess, since I went to school. So even insofar as the practices and things, lots of things hadn't been updated in line with what we know children need from early development. So that's when I sort of, Hannah and I started talking and we sort of said, well, why is it this way? And Hannah has got lots of perspectives on that she was able to share with me, and I've sort of got my eyes opened, I guess. But one thing that we talked about, and this was of interest to me from a policy perspective, was could our outdoor spaces in schools be used as a catalyst for looking at change, creating change in the education system? So why do they look like they look, which was largely buildings on bits of concrete and asphalt and grass fields. And could we change that in order to give our children what we know they need and the basis for better relationships and for connection to the environment and to their culture, to each other? Could we make it a more beautiful, happy place for children to be? So that's where we started, and I'll hand over for Hannah now to tell you a little bit about what we've been doing and what we've learned.
Yeah, so when we started thinking about this potential opportunity, we were really keen to draw on what we know works particularly for Māori kids in our schooling system. And in New Zealand, we have inequities as a result of a system that was set up for completely different purposes. And so we initially drew upon mātauranga Māori or Māori knowledges and what our ancestors handed down to us, as I talked about at the start, our connections inherently to our environment. So one of the key things that we wanted to do was ensure that whatever we created or supported schools to reimagine connected kids to who they were as Māori or as non-Māori, as whatever their heritage they brought with them. How did those spaces help them connect to who they were? Because we know when they do that, A, they're happier, B, they're more confident and they're able to interact with others with confidence, and they learn better as well. As an educator, understanding that connected to cultural prior knowledges is really important. So we look to mātauranga Māori, and we look to science as well around green schoolyards, around some of the movements that were already happening across the world. And we developed a 3-phase approach that schools could use to transform their outdoor spaces, to ensure that our kids are exposed to beautiful things, that they're in places that encourage them to be happy, and that they have opportunities to interact with others, both the environment and other people, and build their own social responsibility. So we have a 3-phase approach. The first phase is reimagining, where we encourage school communities to work together to think big, envision what spaces could look like. What is the potential in our current spaces? We go from a concrete yard to what? We go from one big rugby field, All Blacks, hello, New Zealand, rugby is a big thing, and most of our schools have one big rugby field. So what might we be able to make those spaces look like that support the aspirations we have for our kids? So that's the first phase, and that's a really collaborative process with not just the school, but the families of our students and their families in the wider community. The second phase of that is transformation. So once we have some cool ideas and things we want to incorporate and ways we think we can connect to the culture of not only the kids who come to our school, but really importantly, the land, whose land upon which our schools are situated. So the tribes and sub-tribes where we find our schools, how do we connect to them? What might that look like? And then we support the schools to think about how we transform their current spaces to look like their beautiful vision. And then importantly, particularly for me as an educator, was the third phase around how do we then support our schools and the community to think how they use those spaces better. For example, teachers often like to stay in their nice 4-walled classroom because it's safe. But what we know works is a variety of interactions, a variety of spaces and environments for our kids to stimulate their creativity and innovation, to connect to Mother Earth, to get their hands in the ground, to plant some trees, to plant some vegetables. So how do we help schools and educators first, and families and communities look at these beautiful new spaces and think about how they use them to support the happiness of not only the kids, but the wider community, and to embed things like responsibility to one another in that sense of community and holistic opportunity that these spaces can provide. So those are in general the 3 phases that we worked with a number of schools, and we've seen some really great engagement and outcomes as a result of that process. Erin, do you want to talk about the design part, my friend?
certainly. So the design phase of the process is about leveraging off Indigenous stories. So for every area, the iwi or people, or to the tribes, the people that I'm struggling with the translation required, to feed into the design process. And so making sure that those stories form the basis of what is produced, and so that those pūrākau or stories are forefronted. Also, design element wise, we were really keen to make sure that that things were accessible. So we were a really strong focus on accessibility where as much as possible, but also about pushing the limits and pushing the boat out for the kids who are very able-bodied and really do need a challenge. So rather than asking that question about how safe should something be, how safe can we make it, how safe does it have to be, and making sure that the beautiful elements are incorporated, and so that beauty is a part of the days and natural lives of our kids. For the kids in the schools, so we've really focused our attentions and efforts, because we can only do so much, but really focused on the schools that are in areas of high social deprivation, because we know that those children are coming from home environments that might not have much beauty in them if they're in a state house, for example, and don't get many extracurricular opportunities. How can we make the school site as beautiful and culturally connected as we possibly can? So Hannah's flicking through some imagery here about a real focus on fun, a real focus on natural materials. So wood, and so ripping out a lot of concrete was ripped up as part of what we did. The cultural references, so this is a waka or a canoe, so that's referencing the great voyages that the ancestors of Māori used to come to New Zealand. So the opportunity to really learn about things and learn through play, and then to extend those out beyond the classroom and time. So the design part of it has been a huge focus. So this is a Māori carving, so these are all ancestors and appropriate ancestors to the stories that have been embedded in the areas that these carvings have been placed.
This is another example. This area in this school in particular reflects what a traditional, it's called a pā site, where Māori would have lived, their community kind of village space. So, you know, again, really encouraging communities, school communities, to think about how if I was in your school, A, how would I know I was in a New Zealand school? And B, how would I know I was in a school that is on the land of this particular tribe? And unfortunately, up until this point in my career, I could have, in any of the schools I worked in, I could have been in one of your countries. I wouldn't have known by walking around the space where I was. So, you know, that's a really important part. When we think about beauty and happiness, is all about connection with others and who you are and your ancestry. Again, natural gardens, beautiful native plants. This is a native New Zealand fern, and the design of that fern is reflected in lots of our Māori artwork. Yeah, so these are just some examples, different types of elements that enable exploration, connect to things like insects, and having little insect houses and butterfly gardens, and sensory spaces where there's beautiful smells and sounds, so that our kids have a variety of spaces to go and be who they want to be at any one particular moment in time. I'm conscious of the time, Lena, so I don't want us to go over too much, but if we've got time, we've got one kind of the last thing we want to just share with you is the outcomes that we were hoping to achieve with this kaupapa. I'm struggling with the translating. We use lots of Māori words in our everyday language, and I have to stop and think. I'm like, oh, what does that word actually mean? Yeah. With the work that we do, we really wanted to think about the types of outcomes we would hope to see, both short, mid and long term. And we again turned to Indigenous framework for health and wellbeing that was developed initially by Sir Mason Jury, who's very well known in the health world in New Zealand and worldwide. And his framework looks at 4 areas: the family, the hinengaro, which is the intellect, the mind, the body, the tinana, the physical well-being, and wairua, the spiritual well-being of a person. So we were really keen to see the kinds of impacts that addressing something as simple as the outdoor spaces as a school might have on our kids and our communities. So we looked at that framework and we developed it a little further, and we positioned some of those aspects of well-being within one another. For example, we thought that as an individual student or person in this community, your physical well-being, your mental, intellectual well-being, and your spiritual connection was quite an individual thing. Kind of, they're all interconnected, eh, whānau? Yes, they're all interconnected. So we positioned those health outcomes, well-being outcomes in the centre, and we wrapped them with the family. So we were really conscious that actually for health and well-being, being part of a family or a sub-tribe or a tribe was really important for people's holistic development. And then because we're talking about our environment, we wrapped those things up in what we say in Māori te Aotearoa, or the enduring world. So that which is going to be here many, many hundreds of years after I'm back in the ground. So the connection, the interconnection between our individual well-being, happiness, and our collective well-being, and actually the world in general's well-being, our environment, is part of what we're looking at. And early indicators, you know, we've only been doing this for 5-6 years. So our first school's transformation was finished in 2018-19, Erin. So we're only kind of starting to see some of the impacts, but the initial research and evaluation is really positive in terms of children transitioning more easily into school from early childhood, whānau families feeling more connected to the school and proud to be in a space that reflects who they are, teachers starting to be braver and use those spaces in different innovative ways. There's a way to go on that. And then obviously when you look at the space, you can see it's greener, there's more trees, there's vegetables growing in the garden. So we're starting to see some early outcomes that are really encouraging.
The other thing I would say too, Hannah, is that and another reason why we wanted to really dig into this is because, like I said, my background is policy stuff. I sort of said, well, why aren't we doing this already? Let's just change how we spend our money, school, that I was part of. And they said, we're not allowed to spend on anything other than buildings and car parks and concrete paths and things. And I said, well, that seems like a crazy thing. So the work that Hannah and I have done has been very hard won because it hasn't been publicly funded. We've had to fight sort of tooth and nail and get private, sort of community funding in order to make these transformations of these schools as examples. So that was a big part of what we were trying to set out to prove, that if we do value happiness and we do value beauty and we are prepared to spend money on it, what could unfold. And so that's made our jobs tricky, but we have, so I think one school we fundraised about $1 million for, another one we fundraised I think $1.8 million for a whole new rebuild, and that was a great opportunity because it was from the start, so we were able to take a blank template and say, well, what should and what could this look like? So initially that project, the school buildings were allocated I think $6.5 million, and nothing was allocated to outdoor spaces, and that sort of reflects sort of old school thinking on what education is and what it should be, you know. So what we're at the point now is sort of gathering our resources and gathering all those learnings and really saying to government agencies, to local government, you know, we should be prioritizing this and we should be valuing this and we should be funding beauty in our kids' lives, especially in a sort of a climate where we're facing so much environmental uncertainty and political uncertainty. The strength of our relationships and the strength of our kids' commitment to looking after their natural world is so important, but we don't want to teach them recycling with a whole lot of plastic dumped on a bit of concrete. We want them to have a natural love for their world first and foremost, and for that to develop to a natural stewardship. So yeah, it's been an exciting journey and we've learned a lot, and it's beautiful to hear about stories of other people prioritizing beauty and connection and responsibility, and how we how we approach education. So yeah, exciting to be here with you all today.
Thank you so much. I mean, I became happy just looking at your pictures and hearing what you're talking about. And I could definitely see the Danish schools having all these Viking ornaments and our own little Viking ships and boats. So I think, I mean, so I was in New Zealand 10 years ago, and saw a lot of course, the traditional carving and the canoes and all that stuff, and went to a couple of the museums. And it's just, I think it's amazing the way that it has been is promoted into mainstream New Zealand culture, and how you use it in this way. It's just so beautiful, and it's so obvious. Why don't we do this more? They're Viking patterns that are just, you know, non-figurative, and it's almost like these traditional mosaics and patterns in the Muslim mosques. I mean, different, but it's sort of the same complexity in the way that you know, patterns are woven together. And there's so much stuff out there around the globe. So really cool that you do that.
So much to be gained. And I think, why haven't we done it before? I mean, I think in New Zealand, because of the fearfulness of many Pākehā to embracing different ways of doing things, and to sharing power and doing things in different ways, and it can only be enriching, and you can see the power of a more partnered and bicultural and multicultural approach, and the richness of things that we can produce together. Yeah, so it's exciting.
I would probably temper that too, although for us, what's really important around, you know, those beautiful photos that you saw with some lovely outcomes, is actually the process you go through to get there, because we're really conscious that we don't want to promote tokenism. So, you know, you could have a school that's predominantly non-Māori, and they, without consulting with their local tribe or whatever, just decide to put up a carving somewhere. So, you know, there is some complexity in how that plays out, but if you're going through a process of partnership and collaboration, and you're actually learning together, and leveraging off each other's cultural toolkit, if you like, then I think then there's the potential for it to be really meaningful and authentic, and not just, yeah, unfortunately in the past we've seen in New Zealand appropriation of certain cultural images and words and things that haven't been done in the right process. So yeah.